Hello and welcome to Teenagers Untangled, the audio hug for parents going through the teenage years. I'm Rachel Richards, parenting coach, journalist, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 bonus daughters. Today I'm joined by JoAnn Schauf, who is what you call a parent whisperer. And she studied psychology, then went on into counselling, and she's worked in counselling within schools, and she's also been a therapist. So she's got a lot of things that going on, and she's just recently launched a book called Loving the Alien, which is for parents of tweens. So kind of 9 to 14 would that be the right?
Exactly. When puberty starts and everything changes, that's the audience for the parents.
The thing that attracted me initially was the transitioning from summer to school, which is a huge topic that a lot of parents struggle with. But let's come on to that in a while and start out with goal setting with tweens, because that's one of your big things that you seem to be quite good at. You know, if you're talking to a parent of these young kids who are sort of moving into the tween years, what would you be saying to them about trying to set goals for them?
So I think one of the really great things about a new school year is that everybody gets a fresh start. You get fresh teachers, you get fresh classrooms, maybe you even get a fresh school. And so whatever label or hardship you might have had the year before, you don't have to live with that this year. And I think it's important that parents just reiterate that to their kids, like it's going to be a new year. What's going to be different? And the value of letting them talk about what's going to be different is really valuable. So many times we just want to cover everything and say, this is going to be great because A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all these reasons, right? But when we let our child talk about what's going to be different and what's going to be better, then it's their voice. And the power of their voice speaking to them is amazing.
Why is it so important that it's their voice?
Because when we start talking, when we as a parent start telling our kids something, they can tell within the first 2 sentences if this is information they want to hear or not, because they can hear the lecture mode. And when the lecture mode starts, their brain just turns off. Many times they could, in fact, give the lecture. And so when we let our child voice what's going to be great, what's going to be good, what's exciting, it's them telling themselves what's going to be better.
Interesting.
And they believe it.
And I think for parents, let's say you take a 9-year-old versus somebody who's now 14, there's a massive, massive difference. Huge changes underway. A lot of parents, I think, get blindsided by it because for most of us, we're doing this for the first time.
Right.
So what tips would you give to parents who are going into sort of transitioning into the tween years?
So there's a couple of things that I think are really important for parents to realize initially is that their role is going to change completely. Instead of being this person that gets all these likes and is loved and cherished, and kids want to come home and tell them everything, and then adolescence begins, and that's puberty. That's the change in them looking for their identity. And it's also their prefrontal cortex not firing very well. Like they'll do really stupid things and you'll say, why did you throw your tennis shoes in the basketball hoop? And they won't be able to tell you because they don't know. So those 3 things are really important for parents to understand. And it's not really the child's fault that all these things are happening at the same time. So for parents, if they can move from the authority figure to more of a proactive coaching attitude, that's going to help that relationship a lot.
And how would you, it's a really interesting point you're making there, because I've talked about this on the podcast before, where what I did with my kids when they started to turn double digits was I took them away just for a short time, 1-to-1, and I actually actively explained to them that we were changing gears, that I was not going to be that person who told them how things worked anymore. I was going to be sort of sitting shoulder to shoulder with them and trying to kind of look out at what was going on and how we fix things and how we do things. Are there other things that parents could be doing to kind of make that shift? Because we can say, we have to transition, but they may not realize that you can see that, or you don't. You need to sort of remind yourself that that's the job you need to be doing.
Right. That's excellent that you did that with each of your kids, because you just took that moment to let them know how special you were and that your relationship was going to be evolving. And that's such a nice thing for children to have their parent just understand what's going to be happening. And that love and care and concern, I mean, especially when you have 4 kids, to take each of them away separately, that's really nice. I think one of the things that's important is when we're talking about going back to school is really talking with your child about what the expectations are going to be. So early, as we're getting closer to school starting, probably a good idea for parents would be to go to their child and say something like, I know you're still thinking about summer, you're still having fun with your friends and swimming, but I want you to think about what your goals are going to be for this coming school year. And I don't want to talk to you about it today, but in the next week or two, I want you to come to me and tell me when you're ready to talk about it, because we really want to get started well. So that's an invitation to a conversation.
It's interesting because I think a lot of kids who are transitioning to senior school, they're not really going to be aware of what their goals should be. They're just going to want, I think primarily they're going to care about making friends and being popular. I think
right.
Yes, from my experience, that's been their main interest.
Well, exactly. The social thing is the most important thing on their minds. And that is really important because that plays into our mental health. That plays into our sense of belonging. That plays into our sense of confidence. And so it is important that they have a good social group that they can count on, they can do things with, they can, there's some other things that really benefit from having a good social life. And one of the things that I've encouraged parents to do is to help their child get an accountability partner at school. So
nice.
so maybe they're in a tough class but they're really smart, but they might want to have 2 or 3 people that they have for accountability partners, and they can call and say, hey, I was wondering how you did this, or I need you to urge me. Or they can also just be there for their friend when they're not doing well or they're stuck. So the ability to just have a peer in your corner is really, really important.
I love that suggestion. I heard that mentioned on a podcast with Angela Duckworth, who is famed for her TED talk about resilience and grit. And she talked about, I think it was her who was talking about it, but it's this kind of, if you want to do a sports and you find a partner who you have to go and talk to about what's going on, rather than just doing it to yourself or to your parent, you're sort of moving it to somebody else who's in the group with you. So you help each other.
Right.
I love
another
that.
Another thing that parents can help their children do is to have an acknowledgement journal so that they write down what they've done. Because a lot of times we feel, especially kids will feel, that they're not doing much, they're not trying hard. But if you write down at the end of the day or at the beginning of the next day all the things that you actually did that day, it's a nice review, it's a nice pat on the back. And our adolescents need that. They really need to know that they're doing a good job, that they've got things that they're accomplishing.
I love that. That's like, I have not heard that. So that's like having a gratitude journal, but actually what it is, it's all about accomplishments. Because I have a blog on New Year's resolutions, and I also talked about how you can start your summer holiday. And for me, one of the most important things to start with is, what have I achieved? What am I, what are the good things? Because we're so negative, we're biased in such a negative way that it's actually really good to have. And I love that let's every day sort of have a recap of what you've managed to achieve, even if it's, I managed to get to school.
Right. Things like I was on time. I didn't have a fashion crisis. I knew what I was going to wear.
Yes.
Those are little things, but they're big things.
Yes. And I think as parents, we often have ideas of what our kids should be doing to be held accountable. So, chores around the house or things. And then we see everything slipping, their bedroom's a mess and they're not doing the tidying up, and we're in horror about it. But actually, quite often they're not capable of doing there's so much that they're having to do that they're not capable of doing it all. So for us, it's useful to see that too and think, okay, they're not, they're not really.
Exactly. And I think one of the other things parents can do that's really helpful when we think of our kids gaining confidence and having a positive sense of self is just noticing things and not making a big deal out of it, just very casually saying things to them like, wow, your organizational skills are so great. You reorganized the sports bin and now we can use it. Or I love seeing you be kind to your brother, teaching him how to catch the ball.
Yes.
Or I never have to remind you to make your bed anymore. You're so reliable.
Yeah.
So when our kids hear those things about themselves and we're not saying them expecting anything in return, it really does build up their confidence level, because they're hearing comments that they're not able to measure their progress or see that they're doing things different. So mentioning those things, just an aside, to pop into the bedroom and say, I'm so proud of you for getting your bed made every day. That must make you feel great.
And I love that because it's also very specific. So you're noticing little things, and it doesn't have to be a major, wow, you're a star. Just these little things that make them realize that you're noticing, and because I think often we notice the bad things because they annoy us.
Right.
And what we have to do is switch that.
Yeah. So back to your whole thing that you want to talk about today.
Yes.
Goal setting for school. So one of the things that I think is really great for parents to introduce to their children is this idea of setting a number grade. Do you get number grades in England?
Yeah. Yes, we have. What we tend to do in England is we have a grade for achievement and a grade for effort.
Oh, lovely. I like that.
That's what the teachers tend to give, in schools. And sometimes you don't get an achievement grade. You wouldn't have been taking tests or anything, but they'll give an effort grade.
That's awesome. I wish we did that here, because, someone can work their very best and get a 75, which is an average, but someone else works their very best and they get a 95, but they're still working their best. And that's what needs to be honored much more than their grade. So I love that.
Yes.
Maybe I can bring it over here.
Well, we have listeners in 160 countries, so I'm sure it varies across the world. And, it's a really interesting one, because I really understood when my kids were young how important it is to focus on effort and not on the grades themselves. And my kids have actually told me, yes, you did only focus on this. It's the only thing you ever really concentrated on, because my kids are very, very different. And it would be super unfair to single out the grades themselves,
for
reward or praise. But even then, I think it's not just the grades in school. I think it's also just how you notice these other things you said, like how you notice the other things that they're doing. Because we can say, I'm just praising your effort. How hard did you work at school? But noticing those other little drips of praise in the other things makes them feel valued in a different way, doesn't it?
It really does. Even like, you're so great. You always got your backpack ready to go in the morning. Yeah. So that also, points out their organization and their planning. And so all the things that you can say like that, just little tidbits, are really helpful. But I think when we get back to setting goals for school, one of the things that we want our kids to be hard workers. We want them to learn to work hard, because they're going to need to work hard in the real world. And school's the perfect opportunity to do that. And so when we look at each class that the student's taking and we let them talk about what their grade goal is going to be, it's them setting that goal. And it's okay for them to say, okay, I can get a 95 in math. But Mom, my English is not that great. I don't like to read and I don't like grammar. So I could work hard and get an 88 in language. And so then you go on and on through each thing, where the child is saying exactly what they're going to get in each class. And then you're asking them to, hey, will you just write that down for us? And in the end, you're going to ask them for an invitation to come and meet with you every week to talk about how they're doing in school. Because that way you as the parent get the story. You get to find out, oh, you had that substitute that they'll tell you, we had a substitute and she didn't want to be there, so she showed us movies. Or we were supposed to take the test and our teacher forgot to leave it for us, so we didn't have to take the test when we had the substitute. But you want the stories. You don't just want the data. So when your child comes to you every week and shows you the portal with their grades, and you're asking them, tell me what happened. How did that go? They get to tell the story. So not only do you get to know what's going on in their world, but they get to say, oh, I studied hard for this and I was ready and I earned this. So much better than us saying, you did such a great job. I'm so proud of you. Because again, it's their voice.
Yes. And
So
you're not
also,
micromanaging either. You're giving them
no,
a whole, yeah.
exactly. Exactly. And then another part of the goal setting is like, what, where, and when are you going to do your homework? Are you going to do it at the kitchen table? Are you going to do it in your room? Are you going to do it on the bus on the way home? When are you going to do it? And how is that going to work for you? Because to get those grades, whatever grades they need, the building blocks have to be there for that to happen. How are you going to, what's your plan for writing down your homework? Are you going to do it on your phone? Do you need a notebook? So when we talk about all the building blocks to get these grades, that's what we're really building is the accountability for being responsible, for taking the time, for managing exactly if I have to do this project and it's due on Friday and today's Monday, am I going to knock it out in one day or I'm going to do a little bit at a time? Because kids really need help figuring out how that's going to work.
Amazing. I agree. And then you're handing the skill growth to them.
Right. And I think another thing that we need to help them when they're talking about how this is going to work is what are they going to do with their phone while they're doing their homework? How are they going to control their screen time?
Good point.
Because even though we all think we can do two things at the same time, we really have one central processing center. And so we're never giving our full attention to either when we're trying to do both. And to learn, we really need to, or to be present with whether it's homework or another person, we need to just give our time and attention to that. And, kids don't think that way. So when we ask them, how are you going to strategize to plan your screen time, your phone time, and get your homework done separately? And you say that word separately, and then that's their big clue that, they have to start thinking about that.
I love this. And do you advocate for, what you're doing is you're trying to engage them. So you're trying to get them to think about this stuff ahead of time, which is amazing because I wish I'd known these things before my kids. No, genuinely, because I think a lot of us just think, I don't really, I just said it's going to be great. It's going to be great. Would you say that parents, if your child says, but I can work with my phone, it's going to be fine. Or, how would you work with a tween who already has a phone in terms of just kind of boundaries around phones? Have you got any tips for that?
So, this is like the I Ching of all questions, right? How are you going to get anything done without being distracted by your phone? And sometimes we as parents are not very good examples of that. We have our phone with us all the time and we're constantly answering texts or listening to something on social media. And so one of the things we as parents can do, because we are the leaders, is set an example of not having that phone on all the time, which is very difficult because we all have some level of addiction to our phone because it connects us to people. It makes us feel wonderful. And we get those pings in our brain. Someone loves us. Someone thinks about us. Something's funny. And it feels good. It's so much more fun than doing homework.
Or any work.
Or working or doing the dishes or anything. So we have to help our child understand, like, how long would it take you to do your homework if you were just doing your homework and you didn't have your phone on? How would it be if you texted your friends and said, I'm going to have my phone off between, 7 and 8:30 while I study. Don't bother texting me, but when I'm done, I'll turn my phone back on and let you know. So we're trying to empower them to set some boundaries with themselves and with their friends.
I love what you say about the parental behavior because I've changed by getting a group together with my daughters where we have each other's screen time passwords and we hold each other accountable. So they are allowed to look through my screen time and they have limits on things and to check. And it's slightly embarrassing, and it was, because they'd say, well, look how long you've spent on this. But actually it's helped me. It's helped me step away from this. And I think, albeit kids, tweens are quite young to be doing this with them, but I love what you said. And it's backed up by a recent study I saw that was done in America. I think it was 10,000 kids, where they looked at the way in which kids related to their phones, young adolescents, the sort of age group you're talking about. And they said parental behavior is critical.
It is
So
very
we need,
critical.
because otherwise we're showing kids that once you're an adult, then you can do whatever you want and it doesn't matter. And to an extent you can, but you can't get things done. So if we're telling our kids
No.
they can't get things done if they're on their phone all the time, we sort of need to model that.
Oh, absolutely. So I think there's a few more things getting back to the beginning of
Yes.
school that we can really help our children do. And one is to, in the United States, kids get their schedule before school starts. So they know what classes they have, they know what rooms they're in, they know who their teacher's going to be. And of course, they can text their friends or chat with their friends and see who's in their class. Is that how it works in England?
Yes, I don't think they get it very early. I think quite often it happens just before they turn up at school.
Right.
But again, it's
A
going to
day or
vary
two.
country to country.
Mm-hmm. But what we want is we want them to either visualize walking to those classes, who they're going to eat lunch with, who they're going to meet, in the morning before school starts, who they're going to hang out with, so that they've got a social connection and a sense of belonging. And that's important for them to really know that they're going to fit. There's someone that cares about them. There are people that they care about that they want to hang out with. Okay. So that's a really important thing. In the States, the only private schools require kids to wear uniforms, some public schools, but mostly not. And so for kids to understand what that dress code is, and they can look that up online and make sure that they're wearing the right things. And if they're one of those kids that gets to go shopping for new clothes, then they need to do that. But again, it's the parent saying, hey, look up the dress code and tell you and tell me what we need to get for you.
Oh, we have had such problems with that though, because I do that. And then they look at the dress code and it says, oh, the skirt has to be this length. And so we go with that. They turn up at school and they don't enforce any of it. And my child comes home saying, I feel like a nun because my skirt is below my knee and everyone else is wearing something that is basically just covering their crotch. And it's so frustrating. So I just a warning that, there's an element of, I think one thing is to speak to parents of kids who are older in that school to get the lowdown, like don't buy the coat because the school will say what the coat should be and then they'll never want that coat and you've wasted money. So for me, it's holding off a bit on that stuff.
Yeah. And when they come home so disappointed like that, I mean, we really have to be empathetic and just say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I wish that hadn't been your day, so that they know that we understand them for sure. But it is very difficult when you're trying to teach them to be a rule follower and the people laying down the rules are not following them or not enforcing them. It's really frustrating.
And I love the point that you've just made is that because as a parent, when your kid comes home and says, oh, I've got the wrong length skirt and you feel defensive. I mean, I'd be like, well, that's what it says in the rules. And I love your point that actually what you should do is just go, well, I'm really sorry that it felt like that. And it's a pity that it's not reinforced so that you would feel normal rather than be made to feel like the outsider.
Yeah, because I mean, when we empathize with them, they know, hey, we get it. And that's all about that relationship building that is so important for all of us.
I love that. And we've talked about sort of those things. One of the points that what you made as well was about friendships. And I think one of the things that I found really genuinely hardest, and talking to other parents, it also was incredibly hard, was the friendship situation. And I've done an episode on this about these girl friendships, particularly, which can be fraught, very, very difficult. And I know that at break times, if they didn't have a kind of group of friends that they felt safe with, or at least one friend, it felt very, very unsafe. And so it's great for them to have friends before they turn up or know who they would go and hang out with. Do you have any suggestions for parents about how we can prepare kids for how to go in and just figure out who your friends are going to be, or how to deal with that when they first turn up?
Well, I think one of the best things we can teach our kids is to be the inviter, to say, hey, let's do this. So you're not waiting to be asked, you're the inviter. So that's more of a leadership role for the child. And also embracing new kids and saying, hey, I know you're new. Will you eat lunch with me today? Just to help that child feel better. And that also gives them a role and a purpose where they're not standing around waiting. But when they have friends that they can call and say, hey, let's do this together. They can do the invitation. It makes a big difference. And it also, for them, it puts a little notch in their confidence belt. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm. And in terms of other sort of routines and habits, one thing I learned with my daughter when she first started school was that whole routine that you've talked about, which is she comes home from school, how does her homework get done? And I made her leave all her electronics on the table in the kitchen so that she could go and do her homework and she could come back to them. Are there other key things that you think parents would really help parents in this sort of transition? Not necessarily just school, just ways in which we can help ourselves with that transition.
I think one of the things that can really be helpful is not to pepper them with 1,000 questions. Because we are so curious about how their day went and if they got that grade corrected from their teacher, and if they're did make the honor roll, if they're going to get to go on the field trip. I mean, we just have a zillion questions, right? And so one of the things that kids will do when we ask questions like, did you, didn't you, are you, have you, we get answers exactly like the questions formed. Yes, no, uh-huh, or a shrug. And so when we think about forming questions that are open-ended questions, tell me about the experience when you asked your teacher to change the grade. You're asking for a conversation. You're not asking for data. And so the formulation of questions is really important for parents. So when all the open-ended questions are like, gosh, I was wondering what happened with your friend at lunch because yesterday they didn't save you a place. How did it go today? So you're giving them an opportunity to tell you their story. And that's what you want.
And not jumping in with advice.
No. And the other thing is like when they are telling their story, we really feel that we have like this hat of knowledge, right? We've got it on and we've got it on tight and we want to give it to our children. But what we really want to do, what is better to do, is to help them be the solvers of their own problem. So, they didn't feel they were treated fairly by their teacher, right? This happens all the time. She picked on me. She doesn't like me. And so when we say, tell me what happened and tell me what you can do about it, So maybe, in fact, their teacher is on their case because they're constantly chit-chatting with the person next to them, or they're dropping things on the floor, whatever they're doing. Okay. So what can you do to make that relationship with your teacher better? Because we can say, I'm going to call that teacher. I'm going to have a meeting with that teacher. That teacher's mean and unfair and all that kind of stuff. But what really needs to happen is we need to teach our children to advocate for themselves. So they can realize that they can solve that problem. And sometimes the teacher really doesn't like them and there's nothing they can do. That does happen, So then we just have to say, yeah, that stinks. That really stinks. I get it. But we can't change it. So how can you get through it?
I'm really interested that you brought that up because we seem to have a lot of problems in schools here in the UK with where teachers feel that the behaviour of kids has deteriorated quite dramatically. And people are trying to sort of figure out what's going on because I think it's really complicated. Some of it's lockdown, some of it's to do with, not teaching our kids to self-advocate and the kids just, I don't know. So I'm just curious. I mean, have you been hearing much about it? When you're sort of counselling parents and counselling kids, are they often saying, well, the teacher's picking on me and what's going on?
Well, the same thing that you said. I mean, all my friends that are still in education are talking about it is so much harder to engage kids in school, that they don't want to be there. They don't want to cooperate. They'll do things to be disruptive and so forth. And so they go to great lengths to help them engage and help them participate and help them learn. And it is very difficult. It is very difficult. And I think the pandemic was not helpful because kids were away from school. Many of them were away from school for a long time. And so, when we have this habit of we get up, we go to school, we come home, we go to bed, we get up, we go to school, and we have that habit. And then it's totally interrupted. It's very difficult for children to get back on that bandwagon when they are not thinking that learning how to turn a decimal into a fraction is ever going to be helpful.
Yeah. And I think
when am I ever going to need this?
No, and coming back to the whole question of habits and routine, and this is something I've covered so many times. It's so important because every time we have to think about something, it puts a barrier in the way of us actually doing what we should be doing.
Right.
And I can you're spot on. It's just such an important point that that habit of just turning up to school and not thinking about it will have been challenged.
And I mean, it is okay for parents to tell kids, you just have to. I know you don't like it. I know it's not comfortable. I know you wish you didn't have to, but you must.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is also a life lesson, because look at all the things you and I have to do that we must do as an adult. And that's just the way it is. And so for kids to have to experience that, it's a pretty big scoop of reality, but it's still reality.
Yeah. Yeah. JoAnn, what a great conversation. It's very interesting. I've learnt a lot. Thank you so much. Is there, if people want to buy your book or if they want to come and find you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
So they can reach me at, the name of my company is Your Tween and You, and they can go on Amazon to find the book, Loving the Alien, How to Parent Your Tween. It's not complicated at all. Great. They could also just email me, JoAnn at yourtweenandyou.com.
Fantastic. I'll put that in the podcast notes as well.
All right. Thanks so much. It was just a pleasure being on your show and meeting you.
You too. Thank you so much. That was JoAnn Schauf of Your Tween and You. If you found this episode helpful, why not share it with at least one person? Hit subscribe or go to my website where you can search all the old episodes using keywords at www.teenagersuntangled.com. You can also leave a review there or message me. My email address is teenagersuntangled@gmail.com. That's it for now. Have a great week.